My gold digger daughter-in-law and my son humiliated me for years. When my wife passed away, I kept secret our $8 million net worth. Before dividing the inheritance, I tested them by asking to borrow $50. She slapped me so hard I fell. Go work, old parasite. On Monday, I sold their house, left a note, and posted a photo that made them scream. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Henry, and I'm 63 years old. 6 months ago, I buried the love of my life, Margaret, after 42 years of marriage. What I didn't expect was that losing her would also mean losing the respect of my own son. I was sitting at my small kitchen table that Thursday morning, staring at a stack of bills I couldn't pay. Not because I didn't have the money, that's a story for later, but because I had no access to it. Leonard, my 35-year-old son, controlled everything now. At least, that's what he thought. The apartment Leonard and Lucy had generously let me move into after Margaret's funeral was barely 800 square feet. The walls were thin, the heater barely worked, and the neighbors upstairs seemed to enjoy rearranging furniture at 3 in the morning. But I was grateful. They reminded me daily. Grateful to have a roof over my head. Grateful that my son cared enough to help his struggling father. The irony wasn't lost on me. I heard the familiar click of high heels on the hallway tiles before Lucy's voice pierced through my morning coffee. She never knocked. Why would she? This was technically their building, their investment property, as she loved to remind me. Henry, we need to talk. I looked up to see my daughter-in-law standing in my doorway, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled despite it being barely 9 in the morning. Lucy was 32, beautiful in that artificial way that cost thousands of dollars to maintain, and she knew exactly how to use her looks to get what she wanted from my son. Good morning to you too, Lucy. She rolled her eyes and stepped inside, not bothering to close the door behind her. Leonard and I have been talking, and we think it's time you started contributing more to your living expenses here. I set my coffee cup down carefully. I thought we agreed that helping with the utilities was enough for now. That was before we realized how much extra you're costing us. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through what looked like a list. The water bill is up 30% since you moved in. The electricity is through the roof because you insist on keeping the heat on during the day. I'm an old man, Lucy. I need warmth, and we need you to be more responsible about it. She finally looked at me directly, her blue eyes cold as winter morning. We've decided you need to start paying $500 a month in rent, plus your share of all utilities. $500. I almost laughed. If she only knew that the watch I was wearing cost more than their car payments for the next 3 years. But I kept my expression neutral. Lucy, you know I'm living on Social Security now. Margaret's medical bills wiped out everything we had saved. The lie came easily. Margaret and I had perfected this act years ago when Leonard first brought Lucy home. We'd learned quickly that showing any sign of wealth around her was like waving raw meat in front of a starving wolf. That's not our problem, Henry. Her voice was getting sharper now. You're a grown man. Figure it out. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger. I'd moved past anger months ago. This was something colder, more calculated. What if I can't come up with that kind of money? Lucy shrugged, examining her perfectly manicured nails. Then maybe it's time to look into one of those senior living facilities. I hear some of them are quite nice. The threat hung in the air between us. She wanted me gone, had probably wanted me gone since the day Leonard brought her home 8 years ago. But now, with Margaret gone, she finally had the leverage to make it happen. I understand, I said quietly. Could I perhaps borrow $50 to help with groceries this week? Just until my next Social Security check comes in. The change in Lucy's expression was instant and ugly. Her face twisted into something that revealed exactly who she was beneath all that expensive makeup. Are you kidding me right now? She took a step closer, her voice rising. You want us to give you money on top of everything else we're already doing for you? It's just $50, Lucy. I'll pay it back. You'll pay it back with what? Your imaginary savings account? She was shouting now, her carefully constructed facade cracking completely. You're nothing but a burden, Henry. A useless old parasite who can't even take care of himself. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Lucy's hand came up fast and hard, connecting with the side of my face with a sharp crack that echoed through the small apartment. The force of it sent me stumbling backward into the kitchen counter. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could taste blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. My glasses had been knocked askew, and through them I could see Lucy's face, her expression shifting from rage to something that might have been fear, but not remorse. Never remorse. "Go get a job," she said, her voice deadly quiet now. "Stop being such a pathetic old man and contribute something for once in your worthless life." She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving the door wide open behind her. I stood there for several minutes, my cheek throbbing, the taste of blood growing stronger. Then I walked to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The left side of my face was already starting to swell, an angry red handprint clearly visible across my cheek. That's when I started to smile. For 6 months, I'd been playing the role of the grieving, helpless widower. For 6 months, I'd watched my son stand by silently while his wife treated me like garbage. For 6 months, I'd waited to see if there was any decency left in the boy I'd raised. The handprint on my face was my answer. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up my phone. It was time to make some calls, time to set things in motion that I should have started the day Margaret died, time to remind my son and his wife that underestimating someone can be a very expensive mistake. But first I needed to document this moment. I took a photo of my face with my phone, making sure the handprint was clearly visible. Then I sent a quick text to my lawyer, James Morrison, whom Leonard and Lucy didn't even know existed. "James, we need to accelerate our timeline. Can we meet tomorrow?" His response came back within minutes. "Of course, Henry. Everything all right?" I touched my swollen cheek and felt my smile grow wider. "Everything is perfect. It's time." That evening I sat in my small living room with an ice pack pressed against my cheek, letting the memories wash over me. Not the painful ones from this morning, but the ones from 8 years ago when Leonard first brought Lucy home for dinner. Margaret had spent hours preparing Leonard's favorite meal, her famous pot roast with all the trimmings. She'd been so excited to meet the girl who had captured our son's heart, as she'd put it. I remember watching her fuss over the table settings, making sure everything was perfect. Lucy had walked into our home that night, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She'd complimented Margaret's cooking with just the right amount of enthusiasm, asked about our family photos with seemingly genuine interest, and laughed at all my terrible dad jokes. But I'd caught her scanning our living room when she thought no one was looking. Her eyes had lingered on Margaret's antique jewelry collection displayed in the china cabinet, the original artwork we'd collected over the years, the expensive Persian rug that had been Margaret's grandmother's. I'd seen that look before in business. It was the look of someone calculating value. "She's lovely," Margaret had whispered to me later as we cleaned dishes, "but something feels off. I can't put my finger on it." Margaret's instincts had always been sharper than mine. She'd built her own successful accounting firm from nothing, had a gift for reading people that had saved us from countless bad business deals over the years. But Leonard was so smitten, so convinced he'd found his soulmate, that questioning Lucy felt like questioning his judgment. We'd made a decision that night that I now realized had been both brilliant and heartbreaking. We would hide our wealth, play the role of comfortable but modest middle-class retirees. If Lucy was after money, she'd move on. If she truly loved Leonard, our financial situation wouldn't matter. The test had backfired spectacularly. Lucy hadn't moved on. Instead, she'd doubled down, playing the long game. She'd convinced Leonard that his parents were struggling more than they let on, that we were too proud to ask for help, that he needed to step up and take care of us. Over the next 2 years, Leonard had slowly taken over our finances to make things easier for us in our golden years. He'd moved our money into accounts he controlled, sold our house and moved us into a smaller one to reduce our expenses, and gradually positioned himself as our caretaker and financial guardian. What he didn't know was that for every dollar he moved, James Morrison was moving 10 more into accounts Leonard didn't even know existed. Our real estate holdings, our investment portfolios, our business interests, they were all carefully shielded, hidden behind trusts and corporations that Leonard had never heard of. Margaret and I had watched our son transform from the thoughtful, generous boy we'd raised into someone we barely recognized. Lucy had masterfully convinced him that we were a burden, that every kindness he showed us was a sacrifice, that every dollar he spent on our care was money stolen from their future. The worst part was watching Leonard start to believe it. I'd seen it in his eyes during Margaret's final weeks. The exhaustion wasn't just from watching his mother suffer. It was from the constant pressure Lucy put on him about the cost of Margaret's care. She'd complained about the time he spent at the hospital, the money going to treatments, the way Margaret's illness was affecting their lifestyle. The night Margaret died, I'd held my wife's hand as she squeezed it one final time and whispered, "Don't let them win, Henry. Promise me." I'd promised, but I'd been too broken by grief to act on it immediately. For 6 months, I'd allowed myself to play the helpless widower, partly because the grief was real, and partly because I needed to see just how far Leonard and Lucy would go. This morning's slap had given me my answer. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Sarah Chen answered on the second ring. "Mr. Holloway? I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon." Sarah was Margaret's former business partner and the only person outside of James Morrison who knew the truth about our situation. She was also one of the most ruthless real estate developers on the East Coast. "Sarah, I need you to fast-track the sale of the Maple Street property. How quickly can we close?" There was a pause. "That's Leonard and Lucy's house, isn't it? The one you've been letting them live in?" "That's correct." "Henry, are you sure about this? Once that house sells, they'll have nowhere to go." I touched my still swollen cheek and felt that cold smile return. "I'm counting on it. Can you have buyers lined up by next week? For that neighborhood? I can have 3 offers by tomorrow afternoon. Cash buyers, ready to close within 10 days. Perfect. Make sure the highest offer comes with an immediate possession requirement. I want them out within 48 hours of closing." "Jesus, Henry, what did they do to you?" I looked around the small apartment they'd stuck me in, at the stack of bills they expected me to pay with money I supposedly didn't have, at the photograph of Margaret on my nightstand, the only thing I'd been allowed to keep when they moved me out of my house. They forgot that kindness is a choice, not an obligation. After I hung up with Sarah, I made 3 more calls. The first was to cancel the life insurance policy that listed Leonard as the beneficiary. The second was to my financial advisor to begin liquidating certain assets and moving them offshore. The third was to a travel agent who specialized in luxury relocations. By the time I went to bed that night, wheels were already in motion that Leonard and Lucy couldn't stop even if they discovered them. I'd spent 42 years building a life with Margaret, accumulating not just wealth, but wisdom about human nature. We'd learned that respect couldn't be bought, but it could certainly be withdrawn. Love couldn't be forced, but its absence could teach powerful lessons. Margaret had died believing that our son would come to his senses, that grief would strip away Lucy's influence and reveal the good man we'd raised. But 6 months of watching Leonard stand by silently while Lucy treated me like a burden had taught me something my wife hadn't lived to learn. Some people only understand consequences. As I drifted off to sleep, my cheek still throbbing, I thought about the conversation I'd have with James Morrison tomorrow. There were documents to sign, arrangements to finalize, and a very detailed plan to execute. Leonard and Lucy thought they held all the cards. They thought they controlled my future, my finances, my very existence. Tomorrow they would start learning just how wrong they were. James Morrison's law office occupied the entire 32nd floor of a gleaming downtown building. As I stepped out of the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished marble walls, a 63-year-old man in a worn cardigan and discount store slacks, looking every bit the part of the struggling retiree Leonard and Lucy believed me to be. "Henry!" James stood up from behind his massive mahogany desk, his expression immediately shifting to concern when he saw my still swollen face. "What the hell happened to you?" "My daughter-in-law happened." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, the same chair where Margaret and I had signed our wills 3 years ago. She decided I needed a lesson in respect. James's jaw tightened. He'd been our lawyer for over 20 years, had watched Leonard grow up, had been at Margaret's funeral. "Please tell me you documented this." I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken. Every bruise, every angle. "I also have the medical report from the urgent care clinic I visited yesterday." "Good." He made notes on a legal pad. "We'll need all of this for the restraining order if it comes to that." "It won't come to that, James. By the time I'm done, they'll be too busy dealing with their own problems to bother with me." James leaned back in his chair, studying me with the sharp eyes that had made him one of the city's most successful attorneys. "You're ready to pull the trigger on everything?" "Past ready." He opened a thick file on his desk, one that Leonard and Lucy would be shocked to know existed. "Let's review what we're working with, shall we?" For the next hour, James walked me through the financial empire that Margaret and I had spent 4 decades building. The numbers were staggering, even to me sometimes. Our primary residence, The house Leonard and Lucy currently lived in was worth $1.2 million. But that was just the beginning. We owned 17 other properties scattered across 3 states, including 2 apartment buildings, a small shopping center, and a vacation home in the Hamptons that we'd never even told Leonard about. Our stock portfolio was worth $3.4 million, carefully diversified across blue-chip companies and emerging markets. The accounting firm Margaret had built and sold 15 years ago still generated royalty payments of nearly $200,000 annually through a consulting agreement that wouldn't expire for another decade. Then there were the business investments, a restaurant chain that had exploded in value, a tech startup that had gone public, and a small manufacturing company that produced specialty parts for the automotive industry. Current total net worth, James said, running his finger down a column of figures, $8.7 million. $8.7 million. While Lucy was slapping me around and demanding $500 a month in rent for a 800-square-foot apartment. While Leonard was lecturing me about being more financially responsible. While they both treated me like a charity case who should be grateful for their scraps. The beautiful thing, James continued, is that legally, they have no claim to any of it. Leonard's name is on exactly one account, the small checking account with about $12,000 that you use for daily expenses. Everything else is in trusts, corporate holdings, or offshore accounts. I nodded. What about the house sale? Sarah called me this morning. She has 4 cash offers. Highest one is $1.4 million. The buyers want to close next Friday and take possession immediately. The house will be sold out from under them before they even know it's on the market. And they can't stop it? The house is in your name, Henry. Has been since you bought it 30 years ago. Leonard never had any legal claim to it, despite what he might think. I felt a deep satisfaction settling in my chest. What about the insurance policies? James flipped to another section of the file. All canceled as of yesterday. The life insurance policy that would have paid Leonard $2 million upon your death? Gone. The disability insurance that would have covered your medical expenses with him as the beneficiary? Also gone. And the will? Completely rewritten. As it stands now, Leonard will inherit exactly $1. Lucy gets nothing. The rest goes to charity, with a small provision for a trust to maintain Margaret's gravesite. $1. After years of positioning himself as my caretaker and financial guardian, after allowing his wife to treat me like garbage, after standing silently while she physically assaulted me, Leonard would inherit exactly $1. The irony was delicious. There's one more thing, James said, his tone shifting to something more serious. The apartment you're living in, that's also yours. I looked up sharply. What? You bought that building through one of your shell corporations 18 months ago. Sarah found it for you, remember? You said you wanted a place where you could observe how Leonard and Lucy treated you when they thought you were completely dependent on them. I did remember now. It had been Margaret's idea, actually. She'd wanted to see how Leonard would react if we appeared to lose everything, if we needed his help to survive. It was supposed to be a temporary test, a way to gauge his character before we finalized our estate planning. So I'm paying them rent to live in my own building? Technically, you're paying Leonard rent through a property management company that you own. The money goes in a circle right back to your own accounts. The absurdity of it hit me like a wave. For 6 months, I'd been playing the role of the helpless tenant while literally owning the building I lived in. Leonard had been collecting rent from me to pay a mortgage on a property that I owned. How much do they think they make from that building? James consulted another file. According to the property management reports Leonard receives, the building generates about $4,000 a month in rental income after expenses. What he doesn't know is that it actually generates almost $12,000. The difference has been going into an account earmarked for building maintenance and improvements. And if I decide to sell it, you could have them evicted within 30 days and sell it within 60. Current market value is around $700,000. I sat back in the leather chair, processing the full scope of what we'd built. Margaret and I hadn't just accumulated wealth. We'd created a financial fortress that was completely invisible to our own son. James, I want you to prepare eviction notices for Leonard and Lucy, both from the house and from the apartment building. Henry, are you sure? This is pretty nuclear. I touched my cheek, where a faint bruise was still visible despite the makeup I'd applied to cover it. They made their choice when Lucy decided to put her hands on me. I'm just making mine. What's your timeline? I want them out of the house within 48 hours of the sale closing. As for the apartment building, give them standard 30 days notice, but make it clear that there will be no extensions, no negotiations, no second chances. James made notes on his pad. And where will you be during all this? I smiled for the first time since entering his office. That's the best part. Remember that property we looked at in Tuscany 3 years ago? The one Margaret fell in love with? The villa near Montalcino? You bought that? Margaret and I put the deposit down 2 weeks before she died. She made me promise to follow through with the purchase, even if she wasn't there to enjoy it with me. James whistled low. How much did that run you? $2.8 million, but it came with 25 acres of vineyards and olive groves. The previous owner also threw in all the furniture and a staff that's been maintaining the property for generations. So while Leonard and Lucy are getting evicted from properties they thought they controlled, I'll be settling into my villa in Tuscany, probably with a glass of wine made from grapes grown on my own land. James laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard in months. Margaret would have loved this. Margaret planned this, I corrected him. She always said that if Leonard chose Lucy over family, we should make sure he understood the full cost of that choice. We spent the rest of the meeting finalizing details. The house sale would close next Friday at 2 p.m. The eviction notices would be served Saturday morning. The apartment building would be sold within 60 days, forcing Leonard and Lucy to find somewhere else to live with no warning and no financial safety net. By the time I left James's office, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not just because of the plan we'd set in motion, but because I finally understood what Margaret had been trying to teach me in those final days. Love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Family doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their choices. As I walked back to my car, I pulled out my phone and looked at the pictures of my Tuscan villa that the real estate agent had sent me. Rolling hills covered in vineyards, a stone house that had been standing for over 300 years, and gardens that overlooked some of the most beautiful countryside in the world. In less than 2 weeks, that would be my home. Leonard and Lucy had no idea that their world was about to collapse around them. They thought they held all the power, all the control, all the cards. Soon, they would learn that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake you ever make. The house sale closed on a Friday afternoon at exactly 2:15 p.m. I sat in James's conference room, signing document after document, while the buyers, a young couple with twin toddlers, excitedly discussed their plans for the backyard where Leonard had played as a child. The previous tenants, the wife asked, when exactly do they need to be out? They'll be gone by Sunday evening, James assured her. The new owners can take possession first thing Monday morning. I signed the final paper and accepted a cashier's check for $1.4 million. Leonard and Lucy had no idea that in the space of 15 minutes, I'd just sold the house they considered theirs and pocketed enough money to buy a small European country. Congratulations, Mr. Holloway, the real estate agent said, shaking my hand. I hope you enjoy your retirement. If she only knew. That evening, I sat in my small apartment, staring at the letter I'd spent 3 hours writing. It needed to be perfect, not cruel, not gloating, but absolutely clear about what was happening and why. Leonard and Lucy. By the time you read this, I will be gone. The house you've been living in was sold today to a lovely young family who will take possession on Monday morning. You have 48 hours to remove your belongings. You may be wondering how this is possible, since you believed you were taking care of your poor, struggling father. The truth is that your mother and I have been watching you both for the past 8 years, waiting to see who you really were beneath the surface. Lucy, your performance has been flawless. From the moment you walked into our home, you calculated our worth and decided how to extract it. You convinced my son that we were a burden while systematically positioning yourself to inherit everything we'd worked for. Leonard, you allowed your wife to treat me like garbage because it was easier than standing up to her. You let her convince you that I was pathetic, useless, and dependent on your charity. The reality is that your mother and I accumulated a net worth of approximately $8.7 million during our marriage. We owned 17 properties, maintained extensive investment portfolios, and built businesses that continue to generate substantial income. You knew about none of it. You knew. While Lucy was demanding $500 a month in rent from me, I was earning more in investment returns each day than most people make in a week. While you were lecturing me about being financially responsible, I was making decisions about millions of dollars in assets. The apartment building you've been collecting rent from? I own it. I've I've been paying you rent to live in my own property while you brag to your friends about being my landlord. The life insurance policy that would have left you $2 million, canceled. The will that would have made you wealthy beyond your dreams, rewritten. You will inherit exactly $1, Leonard. Lucy will inherit nothing. I'm not doing this out of spite or revenge. I'm doing this because your mother asked me to. In her final days, she said that if you chose Lucy's cruelty over family loyalty, we should make sure you understood the full cost of that choice. The physical assault Lucy committed against me last week was simply the final confirmation of what we'd already decided. I have photos, medical records, and witness statements. If either of you attempts to contact me or challenge any of these decisions, I will pursue both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. I am leaving the country permanently. Do not try to find me. Do not attempt to contact me. As of Sunday, you are both dead to me. You had 8 years to show basic human decency to the man who raised you, Leonard. You chose instead to listen to a woman who saw dollar signs every time she looked at our family photos. I hope it was worth it. Henry. P.S. Lucy, you may want to find a job, a real one this time. Leonard, you may want to find a wife who loves you more than she loves your bank account. Unfortunately, you no longer have a bank account worth loving. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope with both their names on it. Tomorrow morning, I would leave it on their kitchen counter and disappear from their lives forever. But first, I had one final task. I walked to my bedroom closet and pulled out 2 suitcases, the only luggage I would need for my new life. Most of my belongings would stay behind. After all, you can't take much when you're starting over at 63. What I could take, however, were the things that mattered. Margaret's wedding ring, which I wore on a chain around my neck. Photo albums that Leonard had never bothered to look at. A few books that had shaped my thinking over the years. And a small wooden box that contained every letter Margaret had written me during our 4-decade marriage. As I packed, I thought about the conversation I'd had with my travel agent that afternoon. Your flight leaves Sunday evening at 11 p.m., she'd told me. You'll have a 3-hour layover in Amsterdam, then arrive in Florence Monday afternoon. The car service will meet you at the airport and drive you directly to your villa, my villa. Even thinking the words felt surreal. I'd sent photos to Maria Benedetti, the woman who managed the property, letting her know I'd be arriving earlier than planned. Her response had been warm and welcoming, full of details about the meals she was planning and the local wines she wanted me to try. The olive harvest will begin in 2 weeks, she'd written in her careful English. You will see how beautiful the land becomes when the workers sing in the groves. I'd never heard workers sing during a harvest. I'd never owned land that produced food and wine. I'd never lived somewhere that people considered my presence a blessing rather than a burden. At 63, I was about to discover what freedom actually felt like. That night I barely slept, not from anxiety or second thoughts, but from anticipation. I kept imagining Leonard and Lucy returning from their weekend trip to find the letter on their kitchen counter. I pictured Lucy's face when she realized that her 8-year investment in manipulating my son had not only failed, but had cost them everything. I thought about Leonard reading my words and finally understanding that the father he'd dismissed as a pathetic old man had been playing a game so far above his level that he'd never even realized it was happening. Most of all, I thought about Margaret and how proud she would be that I'd finally found the courage to walk away from people who didn't deserve my love. Sunday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of November wind that cuts right through your jacket. Perfect weather for endings. I loaded my suitcases into my rental car. Leonard didn't even know I still had a driver's license, let alone access to credit cards that could rent vehicles, and drove the familiar route to the house where I'd raised my son. Leonard and Lucy's BMW was in the driveway. They were home, probably sleeping off whatever expensive wine they'd consumed at dinner the night before. Lucy had posted photos on social media of their meal at Le Bernardin, a restaurant that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. I used my key to enter through the kitchen door, the same door Margaret and I had walked through thousands of times during our 30 years in this house. Everything looked exactly the same, yet completely different. These rooms that had once been filled with laughter and family dinners now felt cold and foreign. I placed the letter prominently on the kitchen island, right next to Lucy's collection of designer coffee cups that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. Then I walked through each room one final time. The living room where Leonard had taken his first steps. The den where we'd watched baseball games together when he was young. The dining room where we'd hosted Thanksgiving dinner every year until Lucy decided our traditions were too provincial for her taste. In Leonard's old bedroom, I stopped and looked at the walls that still held his high school certificates and baseball trophies. This was the room of a boy who'd been raised with love, who'd been taught to respect his elders and take care of his family. Somehow that boy had grown into a man who could stand by silently while his wife physically assaulted his own father. I turned and walked back to the kitchen, leaving the key on the counter next to the letter. At exactly 10 a.m., I drove away from that house for the last time. My flight wasn't until 11 p.m., but I had one final stop to make. Margaret's grave was in a quiet section of Forest Hills Cemetery, beneath an oak tree that would bloom every spring for decades after I was gone. I knelt beside her headstone and told her about everything. The letter, the house sale, the villa in Tuscany, the look on James's face when we'd finalized all the paperwork. I kept my promise, I whispered to the cold granite. They'll never be able to hurt either of us again. A flock of birds took flight from the oak tree above me, their wings catching the pale November sunlight as they headed south for winter. It felt like a sign. The plane touched down in Florence at 3:20 p.m. on Monday, Italian time. As we descended through the clouds, I caught my first glimpse of the Tuscan countryside. Rolling hills dotted with cypress trees, ancient stone buildings that had weathered centuries, and vineyards that stretched as far as the eye could see. I was free. The customs officer barely glanced at my passport before stamping it with a crisp thud. "Welcome to Italy, Signor Holloway. Business or pleasure?" "Home," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I'm going home." Maria Benedetti was waiting for me in the arrival area, exactly as promised. She was a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years working the land. When she saw me approaching with my 2 suitcases, she broke into a smile that could have powered the entire airport. "Signor Enrico." She embraced me like an old friend, kissing both my cheeks in the traditional Italian greeting. "Finally, you are here. We have been preparing for weeks." The drive from Florence to Montalcino took just over an hour, winding through countryside that looked like it had been painted by Renaissance masters. Maria chatted constantly, pointing out landmarks and telling me stories about the region's history, but I found myself only half listening. I was too busy processing the fact that this was actually happening. "Your wife," Maria said as we turned onto a private road lined with olive trees. She had such beautiful dreams for this place. She sent me letters, describing how she wanted to restore the gardens. My throat tightened. "She wrote to you," sigh many times. "She said the property would be a sanctuary for you both in your golden years." When I heard she had passed, Maria crossed herself. "I knew you would still come. Love like that, it does not die with the body." The villa appeared around a bend in the road like something from a fairy tale. 3 stories of honey-colored stone, with green shutters and a red tile roof that had been weathered to the perfect shade of terracotta. Grapevines climbed the walls, and lavender bushes lined the walkway to the front door. "Holy hell," I whispered, forgetting that I was trying to make a good impression. Maria laughed. "Your wife, she said you would say exactly that when you first saw it." Of course Margaret had known. Even from beyond the grave, she was still orchestrating my happiness. The inside of the villa was even more stunning than the exterior. High ceilings with exposed wooden beams, floors of polished local stone, and windows that framed the Tuscan landscape like living paintings. The furniture was antique but comfortable, pieces that had been crafted by local artisans and passed down through generations. The previous owner, Maria explained as she led me through room after room. His family had lived here for over 200 years. When he decided to sell, he wanted it to go to someone who would love it as much as his ancestors did. She showed me the kitchen, with its massive stone hearth and copper pots hanging from wrought iron hooks. The dining room, with a table that could seat 12 people and a window that looked out over the vineyards. The library, filled with books in Italian, French, and English that covered everything from winemaking to Renaissance poetry. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, with French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the valley. The bed was enormous, crafted from chestnut wood and covered with linens that felt like silk against my skin. "Maria," I said as we stood on the balcony watching the sun begin to set behind the hills, "this is too much. It's too beautiful." She patted my arm with motherly affection. "Signor Enrico, you have not seen anything yet. Tomorrow I will show you the wine cellar and the olive press. Tonight we celebrate your arrival with dinner." The meal Maria prepared that evening was simple but perfect. Fresh pasta with tomatoes from the village villa's garden, locally made cheese, bread that had been baked that morning, and wine from our own vineyards. We ate on the terrace as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. "Tell me about your family," Maria said as she poured us each another glass of wine. I found myself telling her everything, about Margaret and our 42 years together, about Leonard and how proud we'd been when he was young, about Lucy and how she'd slowly poisoned my son against his own parents, about the years of abuse and manipulation that had led to my escape. Maria listened without judgment, occasionally refilling my glass or murmuring sympathetic words in Italian. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You did the right thing," she finally said. "Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the opportunity to face the consequences of their choices. I hope so. Part of me wonders if I should have tried harder, fought for my relationship with Leonard. Signor Enrico, you cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. You cannot love someone into being a good person." She gestured toward the valley below us, where lights were beginning to twinkle in the distant farmhouses. "Look around you. This is not revenge. This is rebirth." That night, I slept better than I had in months. No thin walls, no noisy neighbors, no anxiety about what fresh humiliation the next day would bring. Just the sound of wind through olive trees and the distant church bells of Montalcino marking the hours. I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the French doors and the smell of fresh coffee drifting up from the kitchen. Maria was already at work, humming Italian folk songs as she prepared breakfast. "Buongiorno, Signor Enrico. Did you sleep well?" "Like the dead," I said, then immediately regretted the expression. But Maria just laughed. "Good. Today we explore your new kingdom." She led me through the property, showing me things I'd only seen in photographs. The wine cellar, carved directly into the hillside and filled with bottles that had been aging for decades. The olive press, where the villa's golden oil was made every autumn. The gardens where Margaret had dreamed of growing herbs and vegetables. "The harvest begins next week," Maria told me as we walked through the vineyards. "You will see how the whole valley comes alive. Families that have been making wine here for generations, all working together." "Will I be expected to help?" "Only if you want to, but I think you will want to. There is something magical about bringing in your own grapes, making your own wine." We spent the morning walking the property, and Maria introduced me to the workers who maintained the vineyards and olive groves. They greeted me with warmth and respect, shaking my hand and welcoming me in broken English mixed with enthusiastic Italian. These people didn't see me as a burden or a problem to be solved. They saw me as the new owner of a piece of land they'd cared for with pride, someone who would continue the tradition of treating the property with respect and love. It was while we were examining the olive trees that my phone buzzed with notifications I'd been expecting but dreading. 17 missed calls from Leonard, 12 text messages, 3 voicemails. I looked at Maria, who was watching me with understanding eyes. "Your son?" she asked gently. I nodded, then played the first voicemail on speaker. Leonard's voice was frantic, panicked in a way I'd never heard before. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" "We came home and found your letter. And there are people here saying they bought the house. They want us out by tonight. Call me back right now. This is insane." The second voicemail was Lucy, her voice shrill with rage. "You senile old bastard. You can't do this to us. That's our house. We'll sue you for everything you're worth, you pathetic piece of shit." The third was Leonard again, but this time his tone was different, pleading. "Dad, please. I know things got out of hand with Lucy, but we can work this out. Your family, call me back. We need to talk." I looked down at the phone, then at the olive trees surrounding us, heavy with fruit that would be pressed into oil in a few weeks. In the distance I could hear Maria's grandchildren playing in the courtyard, their laughter carried on the warm afternoon breeze. "What will you do?" Maria asked. I turned off the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. "Nothing. They made their choice 8 years ago when Lucy walked into our lives and Leonard decided she was more important than his parents. I'm not going to waste another minute of my life trying to fix what they broke." Maria nodded approvingly. "Come, let me show you the room where we store the olive oil. You will want to taste last year's vintage." As we walked back toward the villa, I realized that for the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. Not just content, not just free from stress, but actively, positively happy. Leonard and Lucy were facing the consequences of their actions. Just as Margaret had wanted, they would figure out their own lives without using me as their emotional punching bag and financial safety net. and I would live the rest of my days in this beautiful place, surrounded by people who treated me with kindness and respect, simply because that's how decent human beings treat each other. That evening, as I sat on my terrace with a glass of wine made from grapes grown on my own land, I raised a toast to Margaret. "We did it, darling," I whispered to the stars. "We really did it." 3 months into my new life in Tuscany, I was kneeling in Margaret's dream garden when Maria appeared with the cordless phone and a concerned expression. "Signor Enrico, there is a call for you. A woman from America. She says she is your son's wife." I wiped the soil from my hands and looked at the phone. After weeks of ignored calls and unanswered messages, I'd thought Leonard and Lucy had finally accepted reality. Apparently, I was wrong. "Tell her I'm not available." "I tried. She says she will keep calling until you speak with her. She sounds—" Maria paused, searching for the right word in English. "Desperate." I sighed and took the phone. "What do you want, Lucy?" "Henry, thank God." Her voice was different, smaller, lacking the imperious tone I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "We need to talk." "No, we don't. Please, just listen. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but Leonard didn't know. He had no idea about the money, about the properties. You have to believe that." I walked away from Maria, seeking privacy for a conversation I didn't want to have. "What I have to believe, Lucy, is that Leonard stood by silently while you treated me like garbage for years. Whether he knew about the money is irrelevant. Things are bad here, Henry, really bad." Her voice cracked. "We had to move in with my mother. Leonard lost his job because of all the stress, and we can't afford rent anywhere. My mother is threatening to kick us out if we don't start contributing to household expenses." The irony wasn't lost on me. Lucy, who had spent years living in my house rent-free while demanding I pay her $500 a month for a shabby apartment, was now facing eviction herself. That sounds like a personal problem. "Don't you care about your own son?" I stopped walking and stared out over the vineyards where workers were preparing for the afternoon harvest. Children ran between the grapevines, their parents calling out instructions in rapid Italian. This was what family looked like when it was built on love instead of obligation. I cared about my son for 35 years, Lucy. I cared when he was learning to walk, when he broke his arm falling off his bike, when he was nervous about his first date. I cared when he graduated college and when he started his first job. But the man who stood by silently while his wife slapped his father around, I don't know that person, and I don't owe him anything. He's sorry, Henry. We both are. We know we made mistakes. You made choices. There's a difference. There was a long pause, then Lucy's voice came back, even smaller than before. What would it take? What would it take for you to forgive us? The question hung in the air between us, carried across thousands of miles of ocean and 8 years of accumulated resentment. What would it take? It would take Leonard choosing his father over his wife when she demanded I pay rent to live in my own building. It would take Lucy treating me with basic human decency instead of viewing me as an ATM. It would take both of them showing genuine remorse for their actions instead of just regretting the consequences. Most importantly, it would take Margaret still being alive to see her son become the man she'd raised him to be. Nothing, I said finally. There's nothing you can do, Lucy, because the damage is already done. You had 8 years to show me who you really were, and you did. Every cruel word, every dismissive look, every moment you made me feel worthless. That was your choice. People change, Henry. We can change. Maybe. But I won't be around to find out. I heard her take a shaky breath. So this is it? You're just going to abandon your only child? I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm choosing to live the rest of my life surrounded by people who treat me with respect and kindness. You and Leonard are welcome to do the same, but you'll have to do it without my money and without my presence. What about Leonard's inheritance? What about the life insurance? And there it was. Not concern for my well-being, not remorse for their treatment of me, but worry about money they'd never been entitled to in the first place. Lucy, Leonard will inherit exactly what he's earned from me. $1. You'll inherit exactly what you deserve. Nothing. The rest will go to charities that actually help people instead of exploit them. You can't do this to your own family. You're not my family anymore. My family is buried in Forest Hills Cemetery next to the woman who loved me unconditionally for 42 years. I hung up the phone and handed it back to Maria, who was waiting nearby with a glass of wine and the kind of understanding smile that comes from years of watching human drama unfold. She will call again, Maria said as we walked back toward the villa. Probably, but I won't be answering. That evening, I sat on my terrace with a letter that had arrived in the morning mail. The return address showed it was from James Morrison, and the thick envelope suggested legal documents. Inside, I found copies of court filings. Leonard and Lucy had hired a lawyer and were attempting to challenge my will on grounds of mental incompetence. They were claiming I'd been suffering from dementia when I made my financial decisions, that I'd been unduly influenced by unscrupulous advisors. I laughed out loud, the sound echoing across the vineyards. They were arguing that a man with dementia had somehow managed to secretly accumulate $8.7 million in assets, orchestrate a complex property sale, and relocate to a foreign country without their knowledge. It was perhaps the most ridiculous legal strategy I'd ever seen. James had included a note with the documents. Don't worry about this, Henry. Their lawyer is an ambulance chaser who took the case on contingency. I've already filed a response that includes the medical and psychological evaluations you underwent before leaving the country. The judge will throw this out within 60 days. I set the papers aside and picked up a different letter that had arrived in the same delivery. This one was from the local children's hospital in my old hometown, acknowledging a donation I'd made in Margaret's memory. Dear Mr. Holloway, it read, we are overwhelmed by your generous contribution of $500,000 to our pediatric cancer research program. This gift will fund critical research for the next 3 years and potentially save countless young lives. We would be honored to dedicate our new family consultation room in memory of your late wife, Margaret. $500,000. More money than Leonard and Lucy would see in the next decade, given to children who would benefit from Margaret's legacy instead of adults who had squandered her love. Over the following weeks, I made similar donations to organizations Margaret had cared about during her lifetime. An animal shelter that would build a new wing in her honor, a literacy program that would provide books to underprivileged children, a scholarship fund for young women studying accounting, following in Margaret's professional footsteps. Each donation felt like a conversation with my wife, a way of continuing the work she'd started and the values she'd lived by. Every dollar I gave away was a dollar that Leonard and Lucy would never inherit, and that knowledge brought me a deep sense of satisfaction. The grape harvest that year was extraordinary. I worked alongside families who had been making wine in this valley for generations, learning techniques that had been passed down through centuries. My hands, which had grown soft during years of comfortable retirement, developed calluses from handling grapevines and operating the ancient wine press. You are becoming Italian, Maria told me one evening as we sampled the first bottles of wine made from my grapes. Next year, you will teach the new workers how it should be done. The wine was perfect, rich and complex, with notes of cherry and earth that spoke of the soil where the grapes had grown. I raised my glass to the portrait of Margaret that now hung in my dining room, a photo from our honeymoon in Rome 43 years earlier. To new beginnings, I said, and meant it. 6 months after arriving in Tuscany, I received my final communication from Leonard. Not a phone call this time, but a letter forwarded through James Morrison's office. Dad, I know you probably won't read this, but I had to try one more time. Lucy and I are getting divorced. I know that doesn't change what happened between us, but I wanted you to know that I finally see what she was doing to our family. I've been thinking a lot about Mom and about the kind of man she raised me to be. I wasn't that man when you left, and I'm ashamed of the person I became. You were right to walk away. I would have done the same thing. I'm not asking for money or forgiveness. I know I don't deserve either one. I just wanted you to know that I understand now why you left, and I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to see the truth. I hope you're happy wherever you are. You deserve happiness after everything we put you through. Leonard. I read the letter 3 times, then walked out to Margaret's garden and sat among the herbs and vegetables that were finally thriving under the Tuscan sun. Part of me felt sad for the boy Leonard had been, the child who'd sat on my shoulders during baseball games and helped Margaret bake cookies every Christmas. But that boy had grown into a man who'd chosen cruelty over kindness, who'd allowed his wife to abuse his own father rather than risk confrontation. The letter suggested Leonard was finally learning the cost of those choices. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all the justice Margaret had wanted, for our son to understand what he'd lost and why he'd lost it. I folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box with all of Margaret's correspondence. Then I went inside and wrote my own letter to James Morrison, instructing him to increase Leonard's inheritance from $1 to $50,000, enough to help him start over, but not enough to undo the consequences of his choices. It felt like the right balance between justice and mercy, between the man I'd become and the father I'd once been. That evening, as I sat on my terrace watching the sun set behind the hills, I realized I'd stopped counting the days since leaving America. Time moved differently here, measured not by the accumulation of hurts and disappointments, but by the rhythm of seasons, the cycle of harvest and planting, the slow satisfaction of building something beautiful. At 63, I discovered that it's never too late to start over. Never too late to choose dignity over dysfunction, peace over drama, love over obligation. Margaret's dream garden was in full bloom now, filled with tomatoes and basil, rosemary and lavender. The olive trees were heavy with fruit that would soon be pressed into golden oil. The grapevines showed promise of another excellent vintage. I had built a new life on the foundation of an old love, and it was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. In the distance, church bells were calling the faithful to evening prayer, their bronze voices carrying across the valley like a benediction. I raised my glass to the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Thank you, Margaret," I whispered. "Thank you for teaching me that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go." The wind carried my words away into the night, across the vineyards and olive groves, toward a future I was finally free to embrace.